I see you popping up in chat and saying hello. How is everybody today? Where are we? 10:14. All right, I'm going to get started on the opening bit. So pretty much every year for the ODI Summit, we do these short taster sessions just to show you kind of what we do when we deliver training. And this is a good representative sample. It's a short little snippet cut down from different material that we deliver in some of our other courses. Now, I will say before I get started, I'm having a massive asthma flare-up. So I may occasionally get a little bit breathless and have to stop talking. If that happens, I'm relying on you all to kind of just fill the gap. Okay, talk to each other or something. But let's make a start. Welcome to, well, this year we're calling it Data In, 100 different visualizations out. Last year we did something very similar. We talked about COVID data because with the current, this world situation with the pandemic, there's been an explosion of people taking that data and turning it into different things, turning it into different visualizations. Lots and lots of data out there floating around. But what we've got is we're beginning to see that even with the same data going in, very many different visualizations can come out of it. Okay, we're telling a story with that data, and those stories are not always the same. You can see some examples here. We've got, it's effectively the same data, but very different actual visual elements being created. So we're going to have a little look at why that is and how we can make sure that if it's us that are doing this with the data, that we're doing the best possible job that we can. A little bit about our approach. When we train people, obviously we are the Open Data Institute. We care about data. We are stuffed to the gills with people who do stuff with data. And there is quite often an assumption that if you're working with data, it must all be very technical and very serious and very mathematical. And yes, that is true, but this is our ODI skills pathways here. On the on the right-hand side, you can see where the arrow is. There's the kind of the more technical things. There's an assumption that working with data is all about these very technical things, your data science, your statistics, your trend analysis, and your analytics. But when we train people, we actually come over on the left-hand side here, the so-called softer skills. When we're training people, we're not training them to necessarily to work with specific platforms or specific tools. What we want to do is to leave people with the understanding of how they ought to do it, but why it matters. So we don't teach the what, we teach the why. It's common sense, it's platform agnostic, it's what are you trying to get done here? What are you aiming to achieve working with this data? So this session will be no different. What we're going to cover is, firstly, why do we even visualize data? Why is it a thing? Secondly, a little look at some good examples, some bad examples, and some downright hideous examples. Okay, so you know what you're looking for. And thirdly, the tips and the tricks and the things that will help you get more value from your visualizations and provide more value as well. So let's get started. Why do we visualize? Why do we even visualize data? All right, here's a picture of some data. So it's data, it's visual, therefore it's a data visualization, yes? It's not though, is it? It has no meaning. It's just, it's a bunch of data, yuck indeed. Data is this kind of raw thing that we turn into something. What I'm showing you right now is a picture of data, but it is not a data visualization. When we want to visualize data, we have a reason, a purpose, a task. Okay, we are taking that and we are turning it into something for our own benefit or somebody else's benefit. And when we do that, what we're doing is we're saying, I've done some work with this data, I've looked at it, and here is what I think is going on. Here is what I think is important. Here is what I think is interesting. Here is what I think you should do with the insights from this data. And you notice that there's repeated emphasis there on here is what I think. Because as you work with data, as you do the analysis and you aggregate and you turn it and you shape it into something, you are filtering out necessarily. You're thinking about what you want to get out of it, what you think is interesting. And as you do that, you're taking away your audience, your viewers' ability to do the same thing for themselves. Okay. If we are going to turn raw data into a visualization, thank you, Simon, you spotted the entire slant of this bit. Bias, yes, absolutely. You are adding your own bias, whether that's benign or not. You're adding your own slant on what you think is happening. you take away some of the bulk of that data, you provide something else, and you say, here is my interpretation. Okay. And that carries some responsibility. Bias can creep in. Misinformation can creep in if we're not careful. You are the algorithm. You are part of that system that's making those decisions about what insights are going to come from that data, about what possible actions people might take, and that carries some responsibility. Excuse me. So, with that responsibility in mind, this is what we're actually doing. Data visualization is not necessarily a highly technical art. It is a communications art, which makes it sound like communications not technical, but you know what I mean, okay? We're talking about communicating. We're talking about answering a question. We're talking about helping somebody else to do something, to get a job done, to answer a question, to decide a course of action. It is absolutely a communications tool, okay? Which means you need to be very clear about what question you're trying to answer and who is that for, and why do they need it? What is the job they have at hand that you are trying to help them with? So let's have a look at some of the examples I showed up on that one of those beginning slides. Here's some data about COVID. Who do we think this is for? What question is this one answering? Any thoughts? Just pop them in chat. Yeah, BBC, so the mass public. Yeah, big numbers, absolutely. General public, daily overview. Yeah, a manager, Peter says. Yeah, absolutely. This is a, big picture, general trend at a glance. The question that this one is answering is it getting better or worse? Yeah, it's an at a glance. How are things? Good, bad, better than yesterday? It's a nice, simple presentation of the data that gives you that immediate, the line's going up, therefore it's getting bigger. Yeah. Excuse me. About this one, a bit more complex. Number of cases, people tested positive, and you can see it's a rather tiny print at the bottom there, but it's split by Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, England. So what do we think? Trend over time? Yeah. What other question might it be answering? Yeah, different areas, Emerald says. Yeah, absolutely. And Grace as well. Yeah, different. Is it worse here than in another place? Yeah, could also tell us if there's kind of a weekly pattern, could point out hotspots. Eyesight test, is it that hideous, Thomas? Primary colours, there you go. Regional split isn't helpful. You know, Martin says it's too hard to compare. Yeah, because the proportions are so very different. But somebody decided that this was a useful way to show it. And you can filter. Okay. Right, let's have another look at another. So, it's difficult to read. It's nice to play with, though, that particular one, because it's interactive. As is this map. So, again, what question is this one answering? Why would it be presented in this way? Andrew doesn't like the scale. It's fair enough. Kira says, you know, what are the most hit areas? Yeah, so we'll look what's happening where. Thank you, Margaret. Yeah, other areas with more cases than others. Because people live in places and everything happens somewhere. Okay, it matters to us. What is it like where I am? What is it like in my neighborhood? What is it like in the area that I am supporting or serving? Okay, so that geospatial representation can be incredibly helpful, especially visually, to say, how are things going in the area that I'm interested in right now? So that's that question being answered. Right, finally, this one's a little bit different. Excess mortality. What do we think? What question is this one answering? It's a little bit more complex than the others. Some slightly different data coming in. All right, so yeah, what's really going on? COVID or not? Yes. There was a thing, and it's still going around, with people saying at the very beginning of the pandemic, we begin to appreciate that it was going to be quite serious, with people saying, it's not a big deal, it's just flu. Yeah, it's just flu, it's nothing worse than flu. The government are lying to us, whatever the theories were. Okay. This chart is saying basically if we take all of the deaths from all causes, including flu, over the past 5 years, and then look at the trend currently, we can look at what would be considered to be excess on top of what we would normally expect to see, including flu. And this is the line that's showing us that. So the question that this one is answering is a very simple little question, but it's a slightly more complex way of presenting the answer. The question is it just flu? Who chooses 5 years as a historical comparator, Phil says? I think just because they could go back that far and look at kind of, in case there was noise or extreme events in previous years, they could take a kind of an average measure over the past 5 years. Okay. And you can look at this as a really interesting one. Interactive again, you can look at it by different countries, compare different places. But this is answering the question, is it just flu? Yeah, bad winters and summers could be a factor. So you spread it out if you possibly can. So 4 very different visualizations, all talking about the same topic, all answering slightly different questions. Okay, and effectively all using pretty much the same data, with the exception of that last one, which is pulling in sort of prior causes of deaths. Let's have a look at the examples. All right, the good, the bad, and the ugly. First, though, for data visualizations, what does good look like? What is a good visualization? Or sometimes it's easier to say, what does it not look like? What does a bad visualization do? Good ones are simple and clear, yep. Gets the message across, yep. Easy to read, uncluttered, down with pie charts, yep, absolutely. Someone's met me before. Yeah, simple, clear, tells a story, lovely. There we go. We get it. So a bad one, what would a bad one look like? What would a bad one do? Confusing, misleading, not helping, impenetrable, yep, ambiguous. Yeah, absolutely. So, like I said, it's a communication thing. Everything we've said, all the good stuff, it gets the message across. All the bad stuff, lies, misleading, stops the message from being conveyed. Manipulating perceptions, yeah, absolutely. So we know this stuff, don't we? We know what's problematic. Anybody seen this example before? What's wrong with this one? It's got all sorts of problems. Upside down, yes, Phil. Absolutely. Yeah, the creator has inverted the y-axis. Okay. So what we've got here is something that claims to show, well, does show, the gun deaths in Florida over a number of years, with a particular marker there, talking about when Florida enacted its stand your ground law. Now, looking at this, you could well believe that when that law was enacted, gun deaths went down, because the convention is that if a point is lower than another point, it's less. Okay, that's how we understand it. That's how we've all agreed from a very, very long time ago, that if it's higher, it's more, it's bigger, and if it's lower, it's less, it's smaller. Okay, so this is a misleading chart because, importantly, human beings are not great at remembering numbers. Okay, but we do remember pictures. We do remember pictures, and we do remember shapes. So somebody seeing that at a glance could well go away with the impression that gun deaths went down on that crucial date. Okay, this is what it looks like if we take away sort of all the color and the numbers and the stuff. This is what it looks like if we flip it. It would be quite startling, wouldn't it? It would be very stark if it was the right way around, if that hadn't happened. Now, what's interesting is that the person who made this chart did not intend to mislead. They actually did not intend to mislead. What they were aiming for, no, really, trust me on this, what they were aiming for was an homage to this excellent infographic which shows the death toll in Iraq. They saw that, they were very impressed with it, it's incredibly effective. And what they've done is they've tried to reproduce it with their chart. It is really busy. It's an infographic rather than a single chart. But the Iraq deaths one, it works and is valid because we clearly know that if we see a bar or a column chart, the length or the height of that bar or column represents the number. Yeah, it has that shock effect. It's designed to look like, blood running down the screen. Okay, but it works because of the type of chart that was chosen. Whereas on the left-hand side, that wasn't the right type of chart to do that to. Okay, so bar and column charts, how big the bar is tells you how big the number is. With line and point and scatter plots, how high off the x-axis, off the baseline, tells you how big the number is. Okay, so it was intended to basically to look like that, to be as stark and as compelling and as informative as that. They messed up. They are conscious of that and they have acknowledged it. Okay. Yeah, if they'd done the same with the bars, as Peter points out there in chat, it would have worked, wouldn't it? It's because they changed the chart type. Oh, yeah, another comment. Regardless of your intentions, yeah, the impact is decided by the people who actually receive it, not by your intention. So they messed up. They didn't mean to, but they did. So let's have a little look then. That's just one lovely shining example of where things can go wrong. Let's have a look at some of the other things that you can potentially do to mess up your visualization. Axis fail is the first one, either inverting or in this case truncating. Okay, so we look at what we got on screen. What's wrong with this one? Scale, yeah. It's giving the distinct impression that people are kind of 50-50 split. Yeah. Yeah, and people sometimes can use logarithmic scale, which is equally unhelpful. If you're going, again, this is a bar or as a column chart. With a column chart, the height of the bar is the number. If you mess about with the height of the bar, you take away the viewer's ability to decide whether that is a bigger number than the other number. Yeah, proportions are important. Scale, it happens a lot with infographics. Now, at the moment, there are all sorts of lovely things that you can use in your Canva and similar to make your infographics and to scale your graphic elements. But if you have to do that manually, circles are indeed the worst. Thank you, Emily. If you do that manually, you can easily make a mistake, especially if you're doing circles. Nobody wants to sit down and work out pi r squared. Okay, it's not fun. So you'll go with diameter. And what we got here is that blue circle is the baseline. The pink circle is twice as big. The yellow circle is half as big. All right. That's if you do it by diameter. But actually what you need to be doing is by area. And you can see that although they're clearly very different sizes, the difference is not nearly as stark. And there was an example where somebody had created a very nice looking infographic showing the amount of money raised through charitable donations and appeals for specific long-term diseases versus how many people were actually affected by those diseases. And it was intended to show that some diseases that don't affect many people are nevertheless getting more than the lion's share of the funding. So the intent was to make that difference very, very stark, very obvious. But unfortunately, they've done the circles by diameter, which meant it massively distorted the impact of some of those things. When is the right time to use log scales? I refuse to answer that question. Okay. We'll talk about it later. Martin is a friend of mine, and I think he's just heckling, to be perfectly honest. Perish the thought. We will discuss that later. So, scale. Be careful with scale. If you're looking at scaling up a graphic in an infographic setting, do it by area. Let's have a little look. What's next? Oh, colour. Thinking back to the gun deaths one and the one that it was based on, that use of red, what was that about? Emotive, yeah, absolutely. Colours have meaning, don't they? Colours have meaning. When we see them, they impact us. Colour blindness is a major issue as well, absolutely. So we've got one here which is intended to be sort of a rough, what you might have if you had a map of some kind. Yeah. So if we're talking COVID, then we can definitely agree that more cases is worse than fewer cases. Okay. But what if we were talking, I don't know, teenage pregnancies? I mean, yeah, teenage pregnancies can be problematic, but they're not always a disaster. If you were the subject of, this more cases bad, shown as, you know, red, you might not be happy about being represented as problematic by the color choices. Colors carry cultural judgments, negativity. Yes, thank you, Kira, absolutely. And also they do vary across cultures. Red is not always a bad color. Yeah. And then finally, we've got the whole red-green scale is very problematic. It's the most common form of color blindness, I think. It's not the only one, but it is problematic. We need to be careful when we make our color choices. What we usually advise when we're delivering training is pick a color and stick with it. Yeah, use different saturations of that particular, different tints of that particular color. You also got to think about, even, you know, absent other visual impairments, what if somebody needs to print this out in black and white or photocopy it? Yeah. Yeah, color gradients can be problematic as well. Color is just like, just stick to a monochrome palette if you possibly can. And the meanings behind colors as well. And these can shift across different cultures. Okay, but you've got, so gray can be neutral, but it can also be boring, right? Red can be passionate and exciting, but it can also be dangerous and dreadful. Oh yeah, comment in chat there. Never show information using color only. Use patterns and symbols. I mean, yes to that, but those can be problematic too. Some people get intense visual disturbances if you use lots and lots of pattern. So it's best to be quite minimal, is always my advice. Yeah. All right, let's move on. Clutter. Somebody already mentioned clutter. This is an artist impression of a real example, which I'm not using in its entirety to spare the blushes of the creator, but I actually did see this in a magazine in a waiting room somewhere. We have, well, you tell me, what's going on here? What are all the things that could be taken out of this chart and it wouldn't actually make it any less helpful? It makes me sad too, Amy. Yes, absolutely. That's right, we've got dual axis. Yeah, it's got a grid. Did we need the grid? Not really. Yeah, we didn't need a picture in the background. I made it considerably simpler than the original. That's a really good point. A lot of people won't even look at a visualization that overwhelms them. They'll just put it aside and wait for you to explain it. Yeah, we've got offset axes. We've got, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, what do these things mean? I don't know. It's just a representative example. But yeah, the colors are really hard to read against each other. You've got the average sort of yellow bar. It's like, well, what was the point of adding it as a bar? Is it a new series? I don't know. You've got lines and bars in the same chart. You've got two different axes. Don't know what relates to what. If you have to have two axes in your chart, what you needed there was two charts, quite honestly. Okay, also normalization. Yeah, and then we got the colors are problematic. The red and the green could be a problem if you're colorblind, and so on and so forth. And finally, if you have to add a label and an arrow explaining something, then your chart is not doing its job. It's not at a glance, is it? Yeah, it could only work, as Bjorn says, if you present it and add layers as you explain them. There's too much going on in this. Somebody needs to sit down and ask themselves, what question is this one supposed to be answering? And yes, good point, Denise. We've all done this. Okay, we've all done this, but we learn. All right, we learn and we move on. So, clutter, very problematic. Let's talk about 3D effects. Many years ago, when you first started to be able to do 3D charts in stuff like Excel, we all got very excited, didn't we? We did all the things. And then we learned, now we do better. So what we have here is a very simple, again, column chart. It's very hard to see the scale. Yes, as Richard says, it's very hard to see the trend. And word art too, don't get me started. Okay. With a column chart or a bar chart, it's the height or the length of that bar that tells us how big the number is. If you start messing with the perspective and twisting, moving things around, it makes it really hard to see what's going on. It makes it really hard to judge. So this is what it would look like. Yeah. And what we are really asking the viewer to decide is that one bigger? Is that one smaller? That's what they need to know from this. If you turn it into a 3D object, it's really hard. Yeah, as Julie points out, if we had it in virtual reality or augmented reality and we could move these things around and explore them, that would be lovely. But if it's a 2D presentation, a static thing on a page or a screen, it's not helpful, is it? Okay. And pie charts, which I hate with an abiding passion, okay, already, because human beings are very bad at reading the relative sizes of things that don't have corners. All right, so circles generally, as we saw in that the scale, the infographic example, but pie charts, we find it very hard to read the relative size of segments. It doesn't work for us. It just goes double for if you then take a pie chart and you, again, you go with the 3D effects and you tip it back, yeah? It's very, very hard to judge what's going on. Now, pie charts are useful only in a tiny, tiny handful of situations, which is when you've got 2 or 3 categories and one of them is very much larger than the others. That's when a pie chart is helpful, because then the question it's answering is, what's the biggest category? Yeah. Otherwise, no. What you've got here is, well, let's see, what's the size difference between these 2 segments? That green one at the back and that blue one on the side. Really hard to tell, isn't it? This is what it actually looks like, and you can see that that green segment at the back and that blue segment on the side are not that much different in size. But in the 3D example, they look drastically different. Yeah, you'd be forgiven for thinking that the green one was 2 or 3 times the size of the blue one because of the way it's been done. Okay, so pie charts, just know, 3D pie charts, work of the devil. Please don't. They don't help anybody. Okay, unless it's an actual physical pie, in which case, go for it. Otherwise, absolutely not. Right. So we're coming to the end of the presentation now. We're just onto the tips and the tricks. These are the things that I have found helpful in my life as a data analyst and visualizer. Firstly, a particular book which I thoroughly recommend that you go and read, The Visual Display of Quantitative Information. Okay, Tufte says, above all else, show the data. Show the actual data. Think about what is going on, what you're trying to show. It's really excellent book, really good read. Okay. Don't overcomplicate things. And now we have access to these awesome tools. Okay, this wonderful software that will help us do pretty much anything that we want to do and will never once stop us and ask if we're sure that it's a good idea. Okay. Just because you have access to all of these different chart types does not mean that you should use them. And this goes double for radar charts, which almost nobody likes. Okay, they're really hard to read. Radar charts are the sort of chart that when you put it in front of somebody, they will look at it for a minute and then go, what am I seeing here? Talk me through this. They are worse than pie charts, absolutely. Okay, they look awesome, but they're really, really unhelpful. Stick to things that people can understand at a glance wherever possible. And also, do these things, do something quick and simple. Sketch it on the back of an envelope. Crayon speak code. It can take a long time to pull the data together and start to turn it into a visualization, only to find that it doesn't help or it doesn't work or people don't get it. It doesn't work for them visually speaking. Draw something out really, really quick and simple, so you haven't got too much like sunk costs. By the time you show it to somebody and they say, no, that wasn't it, you haven't spent hours and hours and hours trying to do something perfect in the particular software that you're using. So stuff like this I'm showing at the moment is like, I think that actually the questions that we're being asked could be answered by a chart that looks a bit like this. Do you agree? Show it around, say to people, I'm thinking something like this, would that work? And then go back and start working on the actual data. If we're talking simple stuff and we're talking pie charts, your sketches don't have to be beautiful. They just have to show. I mean, look at this example. It's as rough as anything. It's not perfect and it's not polished, but it does beautifully answer the question, what kind of books does Lucy read? Okay, that is a pretty representative visualization of what's on my bookshelf right now. It's mostly sci-fi. Okay, it doesn't have to be perfect to show to somebody and say, this is what I'm thinking. Would this work? Would this be right? Okay. And also the user story. If anyone's done sort of software development, the feature card or the story card that says, in a particular role as a, I don't know, as a senior manager, I need something that tells me exactly how many cases there have been this week so that I can work out the staffing rota. Okay. If you can't define and articulate your purpose for creating this chart using something like a story card, you might not need to be doing the chart at all. There has to be somebody who needs it and a question they need answering. All right. And just the final point that open data, well, we say this is for everyone. So Tim said this is for everyone. This is about making sure that we're doing all this work, especially around COVID. It's important that people know where they stand, how things are where they are, what the risks are, making sure that that information gets out there and is useful, and that we have equity of access to this information, to the insights that it brings. Our job as visualizers is to make sure that we are communicating and giving people that opportunity to make decisions based on what is actually really true. Okay, we can avoid all of those potential problems where our bias might creep in, we might mislead, by making sure that what we do is answering the question and is helping people. Oh, first mention of Douglas Adams, thank you. If you don't understand the question, you won't understand the answer. Absolutely, absolutely correct. And that leads me to one final point, that sometimes the visualization is not a chart. It's not a beautiful visualization. It's simply one number. The answer is 42, okay? Sometimes that is absolutely valid. Just put the number up there. Right, there we go. So we've screamed through a huge amount of material, but here are some of the resources that I find particularly helpful. For color schemes, colorbureau.org will help you find color schemes that will work for specific types of situations, for black and white printing, for people with particular types of color blindness, etc. Really helpful. The DataViz catalog will talk you through what kind of charts are good for showing particular types of insights. Viz.wtf is just a coffee break, sort of entertaining. Let's look at some really dreadful examples. Very good course I did a few years ago via Coursera about the science behind data visualization and actually how our brains and our eyes work and process that data. And then, of course, the book itself. And that is the end of my session. I don't know how we have very long, so if anyone has questions, I'm happy to stick around. All good? Lovely, thank you. Thank you all very much. Brilliant, thank you everybody. Oh, people asking about how we get the resources. I think we're going to be sharing slides and whatnot, but I can certainly arrange to get those sent out on the list. Are we going to talk about log scales now? No, I need coffee. But we'll tell you what, if you can catch me in one of the coffee lounges, we'll talk about log scales then. Brilliant. Thank you so much, everybody. A couple of questions in the Q&A tab. Thank you for pointing those out. Right, okay. Good visualization platforms, pen and paper. But yeah, I would say whatever you're most comfortable using that you're confident reflects the actual data. I don't have a preferred one myself. Is there a particular visualization or chart that people understand most easily? Is almost always a simple bar chart or column chart. Artistic interpretations of data, I think they can be wonderful, but they carry that responsibility. You know, if the responsibility that goes for charts goes double for infographics and artistic representations. If it tells the story and it's truthful, then it's fantastic. Recommending stick to select set of visualizations as an organization. I think it's not a terrible idea to have a language of visualization that you use, which is consistent and predictable and reliable, that people understand when they see it, we're talking about this situation. Doesn't mean never develop or change anything, but certainly it's nice to have almost, a visual language. Okay, when you're talking about the proportions of one thing against another, a pie chart might be perfect, But rather than always having a pie chart, you could think about the different charts that might equally well work. But yeah, I guess I would bring that one back to what question you're answering and for whom. If those visualizations work, that set of visualizations work, use them. And if they stop working, have a little think about how you might do something different. That's an incredibly unhelpful answer to your question, I know. But a visual language is definitely good. Live data for visualization, only for the brave. But yes, why not? Why not? If you're confident of the data, you're confident that that data is what it says it is, and your calibrations are correct, and you trust your sources. Yeah, I think that could be very, very good. Animations and interactivity, yes, but with caution. Is that what your audience wants and needs? Does it help them answer the question that they've got? Does it help them understand the situation? If the answer is yes, then yes, do it. But I think that there needs to be a fair amount of user experience kind of testing and understanding before you do that. Okay, have I got everybody? Oh, data quality. No, it's not given nearly enough airtime, Richard. Thank you for asking that question. I think that we could all learn to treat some of the data that we're shown with a scoop of cynicism and understand that even if the data isn't perfectly accurate, it's showing the story or the trend. But yeah, data quality is a big bugbear of mine. Do I have thoughts on networks and graphs as data visualization? Yes, it's an incredibly helpful way to visualize some very specific situations, and is just perfect if that is the data structure or the scenario that you're talking about. When people try and shoehorn different data types into a network or graph because it looks cool, that's when it becomes problematic. We want to be showing what's there. But yeah, I think it can be incredibly helpful. How are we doing? These are all excellent questions, by the way. Thank you, everybody. Popping back to chat, see if we've got anything there. I've seen some really good recommendations for different resources and just sort of interesting and beautiful things. So I think we are saving the chat transcripts. I think we're sort of taking names out, but saving the useful bits and pieces. So definitely some stuff to look up later. Oh, question about AI. Do we think AI companies are aware impact of the problems with data quality and decisions could be wrong? Yes, I think they are. Yes, I think they are very much. I think a lot of work and soul searching goes into making sure that that is adequately factored in, that we have a certain level of confidence that we can say, we think it's 80% this, but with some caveats. Yes, I think they're very, very aware. How am I doing? Have I missed any questions? I think we're good. We've got one more. Is there a risk that we try to find the best visualization that the most people like, but then miss other ways of presenting the data? Well, I mean, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. That you can find a visualization that everybody absolutely loves, but there might be something else you want to do, and that's what you get. That's what you get when you're creating something. And the creatives, I think, in the audience at the moment will agree. When you start to create something, there's the joy that you've got something that's coming together, but also there's, oh, but now I can't try all those other awesome ideas that I had. I'm going to have to put them aside and focus on this one. So yes, that's always a thing. But that's kind of good, isn't it? It tells us that there are all these wonderful, lovely options that we could be using, that perhaps those ideas we can kind of put to one side and come back to another time. All right, what's next? Oh, how much time needed to clean the data before we actually go into the design phase? We always use the Pareto principle here, the 80-20 rule. 80% of your time should be spent cleaning and validating and prepping the data, making it fit to be used. Okay, always. Is there a good strategy for testing out visualizations with different groups of people? Yeah, I mean, I would say it's hard, but unless you actually have people in front of you saying what answer or insight they got from the visualization, it's hard to know whether you've had the desired impact, whether what you think is true or your message is actually what was received. But I would assume that anything around kind of using testing digital assets, so A/B testing and that sort of thing, would be a way to do it. What do people respond to? What do people click like on? That might be the way to do it. Right, since data visualization is or should be question-led, are there any visualization patterns that work best with particular questions? I mean, yes, if you think about it. If the question is phrased along the lines of how many, then yeah, your single number card with 42 on it is going to answer that question. How many cases have there been this week? 42 or 84, whatever the number is. If the question is phrased like, is it getting better or worse, then probably a simple bar chart or a line chart would do it. If the question is, how does age relate to shoe size? I don't know. Then a scatter plot might show that, you know, yeah, we've got a cluster here which suggests that age is strongly correlated. So yeah, there definitely will be different types of visualization. There's even one for a pie chart, probably somewhere. What's the biggest, where do most people come from to the ODI Summit? And then a pie chart would say, right, well, the majority of people, the biggest wedge of the pie is from here. Right, we've got messages popping up about events going to start soon on the main stage, I think. Let me just check that one. Okay. Right, I have to go prep for another session. But thank you all so much for coming along to this one. You've all been absolutely brilliant. Thank you for your awesome questions and your comments in chat. And I hope that you found this session entertaining and hopefully useful. Oh, I missed a question from Carrie. Accessibility for screen readers. It very much depends on the person who needs the screen reader. As a general rule, if somebody's visual impairment is such that they're going to find charts difficult or impossible to read, just give them a table. Provide the table of the data. Okay, is the advice that I had, but also talk to the person that you're doing this for, because their needs may be different. Okay, it's not a universal blanket thing just because you have a specific visual impairment or disability that you need this one solution. People have different needs and ideas. All right, okay, yeah, I think we're done. I am going to end the session there, and I am going to go and get my coffee before the next thing that I've got to be in. Thank you all so much, everybody.